Hey guys, thanks for listening to the audio project. I've got a new show format that I'm kicking off today called the Audio Project Debriefed. Debriefed is a fun, I hope to be fun, format where you get to meet more of the guys on my team, get a view into the execution of our project work, and share real-world ideas. Hope you enjoy. All right, Darren, are we ready to go?
We're ready to go.
Okay, awesome. All right, this is the Audio Project Debriefed, where we're changing up the tune a little bit to the podcast and for our audience, giving a little bit of behind the scenes, a little bit of fun into what happens at Pacific Point, what happens on our consulting engagements, that I hope will be valuable and interesting and maybe a little entertaining for those that are listening. And I think a lot of it is, to be honest, I think part of it is just getting behind the scenes and learning about execution on projects because it's quite complex. There's a lot of moving parts. And you guys in the room, so we have, I'll just go over this way, Sebastian Trujillo, Charles Bowen, and we have Keegan Valentine. And you guys just recently wrapped up a pretty sizable project, very complex project, I think. Exciting project. There's so many words that I can come up with right now.
All those things.
Yeah, exactly. And you guys are part of an amazing crew. I think you guys were kind of the core team on this project, but we had a small army of people, from really technical people specializing in different product areas. We had Chris, Patrick, and there were a number of people that we can name that were all part of our team, in addition to the client side and them putting forth quite a bit of effort as well. Always a lot of effort as well. So just a little context, project started September 2019 and went through go live, I think was in April of this year. Yep. So April good 30th. Times. April 30th. Okay, so it was the end of the month. I was wondering if it was towards the end.
No, April 1st.
It was April 1st. I was going to say end of March. End of March, it felt like, yeah.
Okay. I remember it being right around the time that lockdown, it was like exactly. Lockdown happened and then go live happened shortly thereafter, and I wasn't sure how far the distance was in that. Let's start off again with a little bit of context. Maybe Sebastian, all of our clients come to us and are looking to solve a business problem. Sometimes it's we want to increase efficiency. We want to optimize, the performance of our teams. We want, what is it that we're trying to accomplish? Sometimes it's, consolidating solutions, right? There's different objectives, and a lot of times there's actually multiple objectives. For this project, actually all of you, but I'll start with you. Anybody that else wants to chime in, but what was the objective?
I'd say overall objective for this client would be, I think you said it actually, but it would be consolidating solutions. I think this was large enterprise, very big company, healthcare space, and I think as they grew, they ended up having a lot of different systems within like the different departments within the company, and then I think even more at a granular level, even within the departments, the different lines of business that they had, they're using different like systems and applications for different necessities. So I think this project specifically, and then Salesforce kind of roadmap overall is really like a consolidation of all their systems, and then using Salesforce really to provide the holistic view into their customers, which I think had twofold benefit. One would be like a better member experience and customer experience, as well as like a better internal employee experience as well. So they're not jumping between 10 different systems to provide quotes or anything like that. So I think probably overall consolidation of systems.
It sounds like maybe re-engineering process to some extent, having more efficiency. Having to go to multiple systems is always a pain.
100%.
Were there any pain points that they brought up or came up during the implementation like that related to maybe streamlining their process that they had?
Overall pain points. I mean, I think there's a lot. I think there's a lot. I mean, definitely just the fact that, if it's this specific line of business, you need to go to this system and enter in this information to get your pricing and outputs, right? If it's this line of business, you need to go and work in Excel files, right, and get your output, right? Yep. And if it's this line of business, you go to this different system, right? So it's taking like some hard copy manual processes where, business process doesn't exist, some systems that, business process exists in old antiquated systems, and then some where, let's merge them all together.
That's a lot of change.
Yeah,
it really was a lot of change.
Yeah.
They were able to clean up all of their previous data too. So they had an old system with years and years worth of data. Moving to Salesforce, they're able to clean that data up in the data migration portion, for sure.
Yeah.
Cool. So we have a good team. You were the project manager.
Yep.
Charles, solution architecture.
Yep.
Sebastian, engagement manager. So Sebastian, what was it like to work with not only this team, but the whole team on the Pacific Point side of the house? Tell us the truth.
Yeah.
The good side of the truth.
No, I mean, you said it. I think there's like a small army of people, right? I think we had, the customer side, the specific customer had, dedicated resources, and it's a large enterprise again, right? So they had dedicated like release managers and admins, they had dedicated like IS analysts, and they had dedicated like business testers, and they had dedicated testers, and they had their own dedicated PMs. So there was a whole like client aspect of dedicated resources to help and support and push things along. And then I think from our side we had like our own PMs, our own solution architects, our own developers, and we had with Velocity and Salesforce like two very different tools, right? So it's like dedicated people for the Velocity specific stuff, dedicated people Salesforce specific, and then overall, right?
And then people bridging that gap and everything in between.
Yeah. So it was, client was great, and it was a small army of people, and navigating, just communicating with all the necessary people, with the different teams was definitely like.
Did everybody gel together really well at the beginning, or was there a little bit of storming, norming? What is it? Storming, norming, conforming? Is that what we learned in college?
Yeah. So this was actually like phase 2, right, of a similar implementation. In phase 1, I think.
So there were new and old faces from the phase 1. So there were people that came in from that first project, so they had a good feel of some of the hurdles that they overcame already from Velocity and Salesforce development, and then there were people that were brand new to the whole deal. So you had a mix, but it was some of the key people from that first project came over, and that really made things a lot smoother because they'd already gone through those hard learning experiences. They understood that the more we can scope in at the very beginning, the less issues we're going to have down the road, the less changes we make down the road. So there were some key decision makers that were really good at keeping things on track, which was awesome.
Hugely valuable.
That was huge.
Very valuable.
And knowing what worked last time, what didn't work last time that we need to fix this time, and let's fix it up front and correct it before we keep going too far. Yeah, totally agree. Good decision makers, and then learn the mistakes from last time and fix them up front.
Yeah, that's hugely valuable. Great. Well, that's awesome. From a solution standpoint, maybe Charles, you can share what was sort of the complexity or the challenge related to it from a solution perspective to this project.
Yeah, I mean, aside from the fact that you're using Velocity, so that just adds another level of complexity to your solution.
Can I stop you?
Sure.
Can you just give a little bit of context of what Velocity provides in the scope? I mean, there's lots of things that Velocity does, but let's just talk about the one related to this.
For sure. So in this project, we were using Velocity to basically create a guided flow for internal users to go through their quoting and application process, and then also to close their opportunities when they're done, because they had a lot of complexity that needed to be handled for just the closing of the opportunities, and we were able to simplify all of that too. So they would basically take a call or an email, and then Velocity would walk them through, depending on the type of like query that they were trying to do, or type of quote. It would direct them down different flows. It would provide like product cards so they could see what, based on the information I'm gathering, what's available, and it'd give them all the rates right there as part of the product cards versus, okay, here's your information, let me get back to you because I'm going to need to go and dig through some Excel stuff and try to figure out exactly what I can and can't do and what is the rates. It's right there for them. So if they're on the phone, they could just proceed with the customer and they didn't have to break that touch.
Nice.
So
okay, cool.
That was really what Velocity was doing, was providing a really customized user experience for call center agents or anyone that were going through that quoting and application flow.
Okay, cool. Sorry, and then back to your question, the thing about the challenge related to that. I just wanted to know like the difference between the two. And so Salesforce being more of the core solution, and Velocity being that guided experience, really helping the users through that buying, helping
Absolutely.
the client through the buying process.
Yeah, so they would start in Salesforce, jump into Velocity when they kicked off the flow, and then everything that they did in Velocity would end up back into Salesforce records. So it would live in Salesforce when they were done.
Okay.
I'd say the biggest challenge was like we said, we had an earlier project with Salesforce with the client, and we'd actually had a couple projects. So one had used Velocity, one of them didn't, and the one that didn't use Velocity actually shared a lot with this project.
Okay.
And it was very ambiguous sometimes as like, where does the old project live, where does the new project live? Because it was different users except for half the time. And it was kind of different scenarios except for half the time. And we ended up using the same record types and kind of overlapping functionality between the old process and the new process, and both of those processes stayed. We weren't replacing the old process with the new. It was 2 lines of business with some overlapping users, and if it's this type of business, we use Velocity and we go through this, and it lives on the exact same looking Salesforce records. So really merging those 2 business processes was a challenge, because you don't want to change what is already there in production, but you still need it to work.
You need to leverage it too.
You want to leverage it, you want it to work, and then you're bringing a whole new line of business in. So there's going to be changes. How do you not disrupt what's already working?
Mm-hmm.
So that was definitely the challenge, where you didn't have the freedom to just do whatever fit this process. You had to make it all work together.
Yeah. Very cool.
That's a great point.
Yep.
That's a great point. How about Velocity in itself with Salesforce, right? That was one of the first.
This is
Velocity
my
projects.
show.
Well,
I'm
just
kidding.
like working-
I'm just kidding.
How the 2 work together.
I'm kidding.
Right, like how the 2 work together, I think was extremely hard too, of like
Yeah.
knowing like what lives in Velocity versus what lives in Salesforce, and like when those interactions happen.
Designing, I think there's in my experience, sometimes there's a bit of a misconception that Velocity is your guided flow UI, and then it doesn't really interact with Salesforce, and it creates basically a JSON file as you go through it, and you can just do whatever you need to with that data. And basically at the end of your flow, you can just write to Salesforce and everything's fine. And it doesn't really work out that way. That's not.
So it's happening in real time, is what you're saying? Okay.
There's generally a lot of different points throughout the process that you do want to capture your information into Salesforce, because what happens if they break the process, or also, so instead of you go through this really long flow that could get broken at any time and then it all writes, there's a lot of back and forth, and especially when you start talking about, well, I want to create a contact while I'm in the flow, because I'm looking at an account, so I'm interacting with Salesforce just to see the account and pull up the account, but I don't have a contact. So being able to go in and create that on the fly, how does that all interact? When do you create an opportunity? Do you do it here? Do you do it here? And so there was a lot of just making sure all that worked together and didn't cause a problem, because then if you find it at the end, it's too late.
For sure. Well, I think that's an interesting point, and I'm wondering, how we get to the point. I know we do a lot of process maps. We show that interaction. Yep. When does Salesforce need to save something so that the next step in the process flow works? Is that what you guys were after here, or how did you go about solving that? Figuring it out, really.
100%. So I'm just trying to pull up pictures, but I remember initial workshops, right? We essentially whiteboarded the entire business process.
Yep.
Right. We took the entire business process start to finish, and then turned it into wireframes in Lucid Chart, right? Which was these dummy mock-ups of the screens.
And this is week 1.
Week 1.
Yeah. Week 1.
And saying okay, at this point we create this record, right? And then you move to these screens, and if you click this button, you go here, right? And then you create these records. So it went from whiteboard to
we had them printed out on the wall in the room. We met on a daily basis in a room, and we had the screens actually printed out and pasted to start.
Probably this big.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really?
30 different pieces of paper of okay, if you go here, you go down here.
How big was the wall?
Pretty
big. All right.
Yeah.
Not that big.
Yeah, and I think
a couple different flows. It broke off a couple times.
Yeah.
I think one of the main drivers, just standard Velocity too, is one of their features is a save for later button. So if you're going through the flow and you want to save for later, well, if you don't have a record in Salesforce, how do you get back to it? And I think that was something that they realized, that is a big driver of you need a record, because otherwise you're trying to save a URL to a clipboard or something and remember, and it's not a good experience.
No.
So you really need a record in Salesforce to be able to get back to what you were doing. And that really drove a lot of these record creations so that you had something to save.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It was really business process, whiteboards to screens. Along with the screens, we had Salesforce process maps to say like, okay, at this point, we need all this to happen automatically, right?
Yeah.
And then when you go to this screen, we need all this to happen automatically. So it was like business process with normal business process maps with an extra layer of like what happened, what is the guided flow and at what points in the screens this happens as well. So it was like definitely documenting process with an extra layer of the flow on top.
And this is an Agile run project. So this being, you said the first week was like, what was that? Maybe you can speak to what it was like to kind of run some of this stuff from an Agile perspective.
Yeah, I think a key component to being successful was just highlighting roles, responsibilities in the get-go of the project. I think a huge portion of that was we had a product owner, a scrum master to start, and holding those people accountable to their roles and responsibilities that we highlighted was certainly key. Another key component was like managing, which was kind of a pain point, was managing all those personalities. We had 20 people in the room to start, so it was good when there was some indecision or we got off track. We did have a product owner who was great at having the final decision. That was his role, that was his responsibility. So he would hear, I guess, the argument from both sides, and he would be the final decision maker, which again we highlighted in the beginning of the project. And I think that was, that was definitely big. I think to start.
And then as far as the board, like what happened after the week one, maybe from putting all that stuff on the wall, then like where does it go from there? Or like where'd you guys, it stayed on the wall.
So what we ended up doing was, we took all that information in and we tried to scope out the flow. We used like Lucidchart for wireframes, and then it was really great. What we did was we actually leveraged Velocity itself to create the screens. So the navigation between the screens didn't really work. The back-end functionality is not there, but the look and feel of just the screen itself is, and you can kind of manually walk through. We would do this, and then we would do this, and it would look like this, and go through it. And it only took about a week.
So they could visualize
it, and they can really see it, and then when they see it, they're able to say, oh, well, what about this? Or actually, we needed it to be this way. I didn't realize this is what it would look like. Nice. We were able to get that in week 2 of the project, which was tremendous. And we were able to also, these are the items that we're going to be developing. We're not wasting time essentially on wireframes that we're going to throw away.
Right.
So, that's what you're building off of is these screens. And so it was really efficient as far as time-wise, and it was really awesome just them being able to see it on the screen, and we were able to move away from the Lucidchart stuff pretty quickly, although we did still use it for kind of keeping an eye on the total scope. So you say we need all these things to work because Agile's really big on the MVP, but even if you need every screen to work, you need every screen to work. And so your MVP becomes kind of additional functionality in there, but you need the whole flow, and you need to understand what the whole process looks like up front.
Let me ask, that's kind of where I was wanting to get your thoughts on is, clients that move down an Agile path, if they're not familiar with it, super knowledgeable on it, sometimes that what do we get comes to mind. Did you guys kind of map out enough up front, or how truly iterative is the definition, right? Because it feels like the sprint plan's going to say, here's all the pieces that you're going to need, and you build towards that. So there's not so much of a question mark, because I've heard that from other customers, gosh, I did an Agile project and it didn't work out so well for me. And I'm like, really, what happened? And it would usually be some story about how the solution was sort of half-baked because they went down this path. They didn't get that cradle-to-grave user experience, right? The whole process. So, thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think kind of where you're going with it, right? We took the whole entire start to finish flow of this is everything that we needed to do, and we kind of looked at it from the MVP perspective of saying, okay, we know to get through the entire flow, it takes these 12 screens, or this is the entire process, right? And then we looked at it to say, like, okay, if we go through like happy path, right, of like not counting for every single exception or every single like what if, right, just to get to start to flow, it's going to take like X amount of time, right? So then we started breaking it up and saying, okay, let's focus on the first tenth of it, right, and then maybe the second tenth and the third tenth. And we pretty much focus on like, okay, what's needed to get start to finish if that's all we did, right? So that you guys can do your job. And then once we finish okay, this is everything that we need to have, then, the last third of the project or something, we started layering on nice to haves.
Yeah, so it would basically aim to be able to get through the flow and have it function. It doesn't do a lot of like bells and whistles that you might enjoy, but the core thing needed to be done by the end of like 2/3 of the way through the project.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense.
And that was a challenge. It was still a challenge because it's really hard to pull people away from
all the ideas.
I really wanted to do this, or we really need this, and
it's reminding everyone as you go through. Oh, is this MVP? Was a big thing that we did.
Was that like the quote of the day from you?
Is this MVP? Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and toward the end of the project, a change that we made was actually rating user stories 1 through 4. 3 or 4 being enhancements.
Nice.
1 and 2 being MVP.
Yeah.
To the core of the solution. So I think that was also a big change that we made during the project. That was helped
that's huge
get us to the success.
For Agile. Exactly what you just said. Having that methodology, the structure, having the proper team to get that scope sprint plan kind of defined so that you don't end up with like a half-baked solution. And the Agile process itself, that's how it works well, but also the rigor that maybe you want to talk about just sort of the rigor involved with like Agile and how you make sure that.
Yeah, I think in the start we highlighted just our ceremony structure, and we got them on board with that. We start with sprint planning. Yep. So we have 2 hours of sprint planning for each 2-week sprint. We'd have 4 backlog refinement sessions where we'd be working on writing up the requirements and the solution that we'd all be a part of. So we also had daily stand-ups. We focused on what we worked on yesterday. So each team member would say what they worked on yesterday, what they worked on today, and if they had any blockers. And it sounds like a little much, but I think it is really important to do, and it keeps everyone on track, and it really highlights every day. And it just takes 15 minutes.
Yep.
It highlights those blockers. It's key. It was key.
Yeah.
If you skip a day, then you take longer the next time. You skip more days, and you're like, oh, we gotta get caught up.
Exactly.
So
and at the end of each sprint, we had a retrospective too, where we focused on lessons learned, highlighted all those, and wrote down and recorded everything that we learned during that sprint, so we could just improve as we went forward.
So trusting the process, I think, is what the key takeaway is.
Absolutely.
100%.
Yeah.
There has to be buy-in across the board, right?
Yeah.
It has to be everybody's showing up to the stand-up meetings, right? Everybody's going to the 2-hour sprint planning, which is painful, right? Or the 2-hour refinement sessions, but like everybody has to be bought in, right? Because you need everybody in that room to make those decisions about like, okay, this is an MVP, right? Or we don't need it to do this, or this is what we actually need it to do. So like you have to have the buy-in and the people willing to dedicate the time for it to actually work. Otherwise,
you can't do it halfway. Agile's not really something you do kind of halfway. You got to go all in.
I think a big piece was staying ahead of the stories as well, knowing what we have to focus on next sprint, and being sure everything was prepared for next sprint as well.
Right.
So for next sprint, we would prepare and say what we need to be working on, and be sure we're wrapping up everything we said we were going to do in that sprint. That was key. Yeah.
So you were all over that velocity.
Yeah, we ended up pointing each user story we created too. So if we knew it would take some time, or we knew it was important, it would be a higher point than if it was something that was quick.
Yeah.
Nice.
So we ended up being able to see how much capacity we would have in each sprint, so we could really predict based on that how much work we could do in future sprints. So like the first 4 sprints were complete for 8 weeks of development. We were able to see and have a pretty good prediction of what we could get done in those final 4 weeks of development, or 4 sprints of development, I should say.
Oh, awesome. Any good, maybe Charles, any good outcomes from retrospectives where you guys pivoted throughout the project, or anybody really, but Charles, maybe from a solution perspective?
I think the biggest pivot we made was about 1/3 of the way, halfway through the project, where like we mentioned where we started saying 1, 2, 3, or 4 as far as each like development item.
Yep.
Well, we didn't have that at the beginning, and we weren't making the progress we needed to make, and so having that cradle to grave at the beginning, we were able to look forward and say, okay, are we going to really be able to hit all of our timelines at the rate we're going? And we look at it and go, nope, we're not going to. And being able to have that hard conversation early was fantastic, because we basically bring it up on one of our sessions, say, hey, we're not moving fast enough. We are going to not meet our timelines just as we're going. And be honest with the client, and they looked at it and go, well, you're right. What do we have to do? Like, what needs to change? Go, well, we're adding all these like crazy little logic dependency, like we want fields to disappear when this happens, or things to do like really cool things. Are these really, really needed now in the beginning of the project?
Separating out those priorities.
Absolutely.
I get the point now.
Yeah, so that was a big deal, and they were really open to it. They were actually extremely grateful that we had this internal conversation and we were able to pivot rather than, a couple weeks before the end of the project, oh, we need more time, we're not going to, like, it was really good. And they were really disciplined too. And once they changed that mindset of, oh, it only if I really, really need it do I include it right now.
So is that how Is This MVP came to be?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And we recommended enhancements, things that were initially brought up as MVP. We said, is this really MVP? And would say, can this be your enhancement? And we recommended things that we felt like at that point were enhancements. I think we had a late night in this room, probably 8, 9 o'clock. I think we stayed in here and really highlighted the plan halfway through the project for the rest of the project. And I think that was a big portion for sure.
Yeah.
It makes you more efficient too, right, with what you're able to deliver.
Oh,
because you can
absolutely.
get through the core and then you can add in all the extras, and it's much more efficient. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you're 100% right. You have to have that start to finish timeline outlined, right? So you can see when you start to slip. And I think there's certain milestones where you have to have a checkpoint, right? And be like, okay, are we tracking, right? Are we going to make the timeline that we have laid out so far, right? Or do we need to start cutting things, right? If you can go and have an honest conversation and say, like, if we keep getting to this level of detail, we're not going to be able to get here, right? It's a lot easier to say, like, okay, I don't need this, right?
Yeah.
Or no, it doesn't need to do that, right? But you have to have okay, this is start to finish, defined up front, this is how long it's going to take, and then certain checkpoints to say, like, okay, are we there yet, right? Are we where we should be, or do we need to start cutting?
And so we had an enhancement bucket that we kept the stories in. And if we could bring on more work, we would. And we'd take from that enhancement, and they prioritized their enhancement user stories.
Yep.
And so when we could fit them in certain sprints and had more capacity, we were able to bring in
Perfect.
from that enhancement bucket.
Nice.
So, I think that was,
Well done.
again, that was a pain point. That was a big turning point of the project,
I love
for
that.
sure.
That's very cool. I'm glad. I mean, it's awesome. There's a point many years ago where our company was doing an Agile coaching thing, kind of this Agile transformation for one of our clients. And I remember we went through this coaching thingy. We did the training. We gave them all empowered all their people. And then we're like, okay, let's try it out. Let's do first small MVP. And they were all doing the thing, the product managers there, and I think they had they just didn't have the rigor, what you're talking about, where they had forced everyone. And I remember, I'll never forget, they had the backlog board up and blockers, right? It was all this, I meant to say blockers, not backlog, but all the blockers were there every single week. It was who's gonna remove the blockers? The same blockers were there. And I think that commitment and trust in the process and the complete buy-in is the only way it works. And then and then they were yeah, I don't think Agile's gonna work for us. And I'm it's hard. It's awesome.
Again, those stand-ups are daily.
Yeah,
so we had
it's
15 minutes,
commitment.
and if you heard the same blocker, then it was oh, how do we unblock this? Yeah, what do we need to do to unblock this?
Yeah.
So I think that is important. Like Sebastian said, the buy-in in the beginning is
It's huge.
Yep.
I also think it's giving people the autonomy to make decisions, right? I think that's a big part of Agile is you need to put the people in place to be able to make the decisions, right? And not have
That's
to
a
go
really
follow
good
with 8
point.
people, right?
Yeah.
If people on the project need to be able to make decisions and keep moving, otherwise it doesn't work, right?
That's so good. If you're not empowered, if you're the guy, but you're not really empowered to actually make the decision,
Yeah,
you can't do
that's pointless. Yeah.
We have
That's
an
a
awesome
really good
product
point.
owner, like you said,
Yep.
right, who can make those decisions and take in the information and make a decision and keep going.
And there were times where there was literally 2 different mindsets. And
Often.
Yeah.
Often.
And
Just a couple times.
they would
A day.
yeah. I mean, you literally hear both of their points of view, and the product owner would make a decision.
Love
And
it.
it's highlighting that roles, responsibilities in the beginning of the project, and making sure that they're being held accountable.
Well, I like that, and I think it's a good transition into a topic that we get a lot with customers is change management. And when you have multiple opinions on the project, which obviously came to be, you have a big change in process. I'm just curious, what maybe Sebastian share, what maybe we weren't involved necessarily in all the change management details, but just because it comes up so much with our clients and recommending things that they should do to help people prepare for change, what were some things that happened on this project that you might share with our audience?
Fair. Lots of things come to mind. So I think this client specifically does a really good job about identifying why they're going through the project and their strategic long-term roadmap, right? And this is where we're going. This is why we're using Salesforce, right? We're making this huge investment, and it's a 3-year investment, and we're here in the roadmap, right? And really getting the people to understand why they're doing the project and turning it into a positive thing, right? We had a whole engagement team, right? Of go to these fun quizzes and you get stuffed
Salesforce
animals.
word of the day. And
Stuffed
word of the
animals.
day, and
Swag always helps.
They had a raffle, I think, for some stuffed animals and other things, and
Like Salesforce dolls.
Salesforce dolls.
Yeah.
So they do a good job of outlining this is the decision we made, this is where we're going, this is why we're doing it, and turning it into a positive thing. That doesn't happen very often, right? And I think they did a good job at that. And,
It wasn't we're using Salesforce so that we can micromanage you more effectively.
Yeah, we're not trying to spy on you. This is really to help you, right? Make it easier for you. And it's not an overnight thing, right? It's the multi-year.
Was there
we
just
invest
tons
this
of
much.
communication throughout, as far as you had visibility? I know we were heads down, getting stuff done, but I don't know what visibility we had to that, like I said, we could share with others.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kickoffs initially was a big part of it, right? You get everybody who's going to be part of the project of, this is the project itself, this is why we're doing it, this is where we're going, this is where we've come from, where we started, where we are today, right? And so we did the kickoff meeting. I think, that we also did progress demo meetings with the entire business team to say okay, this is happening, right? It's happening, and 6 months from now, let's check in every 2 weeks and show you the progress we made, and give demos to the entire anybody who has vested interest and will be using the system, come and see where we're at, just so you know it's coming.
That's
the
a great
entire
point.
way,
A
right?
huge part of the ceremonies was after each sprint we had a demo that we would review with the business to be sure that they were on the same page, they were aligned with the final solution.
No confusion.
So I think that week 1, when we highlighted the final solution in those wireframes, we reviewed that with the business. So we were able to say, this is the final solution, this is what we're working towards, is this what you're looking for, is this good? And they were able to provide feedback on some changes, we were able to make some updates based on that feedback. Each week.
Yeah.
I mean, each sprint.
Every 2 weeks,
Yeah.
Every 2 weeks.
Yep.
That way it's not you have a kickoff meeting and 6 months later
See you
you're
later. Yeah.
okay, it's starting, good luck, right?
Exactly.
How did the raffle work? What was the raffle? You had to take a quiz?
No, it was word of the week or word of the day, and then whoever each time you basically responded with the right word of the day, you'd get a raffle number, and so it would increase your chances, and then they do a drawing.
Okay, got it. And then we were drawing.
Yeah.
Nice.
It was fun. It helped with a lot of terminology changes too, right?
That's a really good idea.
Replacing existing systems. It's a lot of it's just switching your mindset of this is how I see it today, right? And this is what this word means in today's world, right? And it's a lot of just shifting vocabulary in your mindset. So kind of fun twist on it, get people thinking about terms beforehand, and kind of keep them in loop.
Nice. And now we're MVP live April, I guess, beginning of April. And now we're continuing to provide support for the customer, ongoing support. So the journey doesn't end; it continues to go with the Agile methodology still running its course, and
still
we're
using
continuing
a
to
2-week sprint methodology for
never stops.
it just keeps on going, which is good. And I'm sure that I know we're maybe not always close to every single end user, but I'm sure there's some big benefits gained for them to have that system live so quickly. That's awesome. The other question I had, so when you guys, you'd go in for many of the ceremonies, I would imagine, into the office. I'm just wondering, like, when lockdown happened, was the customer pretty accustomed to using, like, the video meeting thing, and were there any, like, embarrassing things that popped up on screens, or like, oh God, like, you just showed your screen or video, there's something on your computer?
I don't think embarrassing videos, because they don't use video too much. Definitely
Okay.
some funny audio snafus.
Lots of funny audio, lots of people thinking they're on mute, and they're
Yeah.
not actually on mute. You can tell a lot of people like rolled out of bed, straight onto a phone call, and they're half asleep. Nothing
No one
too
in this
bad.
room, I'm sure.
Yeah,
That's right. That's right.
Never,
Never.
that's right.
Never.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Well,
Only
that's good. I was
not-
just curious because that was sort of a weird thing where we were almost at the end, and then also we were in lockdown. And I know it was forced lockdown, back then. So, I was just curious if you had anything funny.
There was a lot of conversations regarding mute. Like a lot of people didn't feel like
Understand
Yeah,
what mute was.
the mute was definitely
Everybody go on mute. Somebody
Repetitive.
starts getting angry. Can you
Repetitive.
please go on mute?
yeah. a
Like,
couple
Couple
roosters in the
angry
background.
people.
Yeah.
Said it again, please go on mute. There's a couple
Luckily, we were the meeting host most of the time.
So you
and
forced
you
a
forced
mute.
me, like, and you're gone.
100%. That's good.
You like that feature, Charles?
Yeah.
I used it a lot.
Yeah.
I used it quite a bit.
Yeah.
And they're quiet now.
We did switch to training online. Like as soon as COVID switched, we were supposed to train like 3 sessions of like 50 people or something, and had to like transition all of it to online webinar training that you did.
That was definitely I wouldn't say a pain point, but certainly a big change to the project was, okay, we're training 70 people, we have a very large room to do that, now it's online. We gotta now set up meetings for the testing, we gotta make sure we get enough people in there to test, because we don't know how many people can be on that specific, because we're using for the training, using their specific
Meeting tool.
Meeting tool, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, we've had that with some of the other customers too that have coordinated UAT. It's like X number of people to make sure there's social distancing, and then now you got to book more rooms, and then there is an element that you make the choice of when do you really need to be in person and when do you not, versus the things that ended up being completely online. So
4 hours of training online is hard.
that is hard.
Yeah.
Of like
It's hard to
keeping
keep.
people
You don't know if you have the
engaged.
attention.
Yeah, it's so hard.
Yeah, it's
They could be
tough.
like watching TV, you have no idea. So it's like, they didn't do that, hopefully, but it's just a long time to not be able to look
Oh
and see if people
gosh, yeah.
are paying attention at all. Good stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Well, do you guys like memes?
Yeah.
Wow,
Is
this
that a trick question?
Memes are great.
Definitely.
So I have captured what I believe are memes for each one of you.
This
So
is terrifying.
first up,
I don't like this.
okay, get me out of here. No, first up is Keegan. So I gotta find my cursor here. I think I lost it.
I'm excited for Keegan's.
Oh, there's my cursor. It's all over. Was that you? Was
I like
that really
it.
you?
I like it.
You had all the technical
like it.
guys. You had everyone. And you were like,
that could have been me. That could have been me.
I could see you like making the phone call right now.
That's
All right.
great. That's good.
Next up is Charles.
Uh-oh.
The solution continues.
That is
You're back into support. It's over. You're like, yay, it's done. No, yeah.
For those that don't know, I'm the only one that's still on the project.
He's
So fitting.
He's working support. Yes.
So fitting. And then last but not least, Sebastian.
Stop talking.
That does.
That is so Sebastian. That's actually, I'm sure, how a lot of the meetings went. But well done, guys. That pretty much all I had. It was great to hear the readout, and I'm thankful for you guys. You guys are super fun to work with, and I'm thankful for the work you do. It's good times. You're an amazing group of people.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
All right.
Thanks for the wine.
You're very welcome. Is that how I got you here?
I'm happy to be here.
Okay. All right, cool.